Have you been following the BBC, New York Times story about U.S. sailors jumping off an aircraft carrier in the Persian Gulf because the Navy is stressing them too much? Right now, you even have showboating Democrat congressmen demanding to come on board the carrier in an active war zone to inspect the conditions. But I think this story will prove to be a fatal mistake by the City of London and the Democrats trying to use the Iran war to destroy Donald Trump. Here's Afghanistan war veteran and double amputee Joey Jones responding on Saturday.
I mean, how weak are you on TV complaining about tuna and noodles? I'm sorry. You volunteered to serve your country. You can come back, get out of the military, and do like all of these Democrat veterans and complain about it and make commercials and be a sellout if you want to and come up with a new way of doing things. The last Democrat president that I remember that was deploying troops, Barack Obama, had the Army going to Iraq on patrol bases for 15 months at a time, eating MREs.
Here's Secretary of the Navy Hung Cao with a similar response. Unfortunately, the media are trying to paint our warriors as victims. Not only is that dishonest, but it takes away the focus on the enemy and the threat it poses against our nation, people, and way of life. There is no question our young men and women have been pushed to their limits, but they have never broken. They are rightly tired, but they've never been out of the fight. However, it is clear, knowing the whole story, our force and their families are not victims. They're the epitome of American strength and resilience. I'm Barbara Boyd, and I've studied British psychological warfare and propaganda operation used in wars and color revolutions since the First World War. Today, we're looking at three parts of the same story. First, who the real enemy is in the Iran war. Second, the psychological tools the enemy is using right now. And third, how the USS Lincoln story will blow back hard on its creators. But first, hit the like button and share this video. It helps us grow the very knowledgeable audience we need right now if we're going to save the country. Here's Vice President Vance talking about the Iran war with Will Cain last Thursday.
We're using those tools very selectively, very strategically to get the outcome that the President of the United States needs to get for the benefit of the American people. And it really is twofold. It's ensuring that the Gulf countries continue to send oil and gas to the world economy so that we have energy price stability. That's obviously important for the American people. I know that oil is down today, and it's way down from the highs in the early days of the conflict. That's goal number one. Keep oil and gas cheap for Americans all over our country. And then obviously goal number two is ensure that Iran never gets a nuclear weapon. I feel confident we're accomplishing both of those goals, but it's inherently an unpredictable thing because the Iranians themselves are unpredictable and they sometimes don't honor the commitments they've made to us.
The press pounced immediately on that statement. They said Vance was, quote, moving the goalposts again in a war, quote, Trump chose without any plan that is killing Americans at the, quote, gas pump ahead of the midterms. That's the four-beat sentence we've heard so often it almost seems like reality. And that's the goal of any good psychological warfare operation. Identify your opponent's pain points and wield words and images about them like a drone swarm, creating his demise without really firing a shot. But that's not what the president said in full context, and it's not the reality of the situation. Well prior to Operation Epic Fury, Iran had repeatedly threatened to close the strait. That vital choke point borders the country, and the Iranians have been aware of its warfare value since the 1979 revolution. In fact, during the Iran-Iraq war, the Iranians even mined the strait. White House trade advisor Peter Navarro calculates what he calls the Iran terror risk oil and gas premium. He shows it adds $10 to $15 to every barrel of oil in normal times. That price spikes whenever direct terrorism by the IRGC or its proxies disrupts oil and gas production in the Gulf. So prior to this war, you have a terrorist nation telling the president's negotiators they have enough enriched uranium to make 11 nuclear bombs and set the Middle East on fire. That same terrorist nation also controlled the price of oil and natural gas here and could set off world economic chaos anytime they chose to close the strait. It is only a war of choice by Trump if Trump derangement syndrome, created by 10 years of psychological warfare by the enemies of our nation, has destroyed the ability to make rational judgments. The foreign control of the price of oil and gas is a product of the petrodollar financial system, which came into being after 1971. It rips off the American consumer in two ways. First, by insurance premiums and futures contracts setting the price of oil and gas from London. Second, by the Gulf countries and the IRGC depositing their profits in London's banks. Right now, Iran, London's tool in this energy blackmail game, is in economic collapse. Its nuclear and military capacities are destroyed. Its economic collapse is next, when Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent unleashes a monster wave of economic destruction scheduled for this week. If this is all new to you, subscribe to our free newsletter at PrometheanAction.com, and you'll learn a whole lot more about who really controls our economy at this point and what Trump is fighting against. The link is in the description. Now, back in 1953, the philosopher Bertrand Russell, a man deeply embedded in the British establishment, laid out the blueprint for the next century of British imperial control. He wrote this about mass psychology in his book, The Impact of Science on Society. This subject, he said, will make great strides when it is taken up by scientists under a scientific dictatorship. The social psychologists of the future will have a number of classes of school children on whom they will try different methods of producing an unshakable conviction that snow is black. Various results will soon be arrived at. First, that the influence of the home is obstructive. Second, that not much can be done unless indoctrination begins before the age of 10. Third, that verses set to music and repeatedly intoned are very effective. Fourth, that the opinion that snow is white must be held to show a morbid taste for eccentricity. Russell could have been describing what we're seeing in the communist and anarchist gangs now embraced by the Democrats. But he was describing an imperial transition from physical military conquest to psychological conquest. And the institution that picked up that torch and ran with it was the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London. In 1967, Tavistock's Fred Emery published a paper called The Next 30 Years in the journal Human Relations. He said modern societies were entering what he called turbulent field environments. That is, conditions so complex and fast-moving that former social stabilizers like the family and the church break down. He said populations would adapt to this by becoming passive. Three reactions would create the passivity: rejection of the larger nation they live in favor of small tribes based on racial and sexual identities and similar cultures; development of stoic emotional states to guard against the pain of possible failure; and finally, deliberate social isolation. Could you create these turbulent fields deliberately? Their use is obvious for warfare and social control. In 2000, two RAND Corporation strategists, John Arkilla and David Ronfeld, took that up in a document called Swarming and the Future of Conflict. They argued that warfare had evolved into what they called swarming, small, dispersed network units striking from every direction with no fixed front. They say explicitly that the clearest working model of a swarm isn't military at all. It's the activist NGO network. They name the Zapatista movement in Mexico and the anti-Milosevic street protests in Serbia as examples. In other words, the turbulent field Fred Emery described is exactly the field in which color revolutions now flourish. Small group mobs and focused media propaganda creating the turbulent fields. The targeted population, faced with massive social unrest engineered through the swarm, becomes passive and regresses to an infantile state in which their own satisfaction and survival are primary. NATO's cognitive warfare doctrine, introduced in 2021, takes that a step even further. It says the human mind is the sixth and most important domain of all warfare. Cognitive warfare's aim, get this, is to turn its targets into weapons its operators control, human weapons, while creating a controlled media environment limits the choices of an adversary. That is what has been deployed for 10 years against President Donald Trump. It is what the current State Department official Darren Beattie accurately describes as a color revolution. Journalist Richard Poe has thoroughly documented the origins of these color revolutions and the warfare techniques of British secret intelligence. But these techniques fall apart once the cause of the societal turbulence and anxiety is accurately identified. Once it's clear to the victims that they've been played, and reality is injected into the situation. Here's Stephen Miller doing a very good job of doing just that on Saturday.
This is a struggle for the survival of America. It's that serious. It's that real. What you talked about, abolishing police, abolishing borders, abolishing ICE, abolishing fossil fuels, gutting the Department of War, these actions collectively would bring America to its knees. It would cripple us. It would crush us. It would destroy everything 250 years of patriots fought, bled, and died for. To the people at home, everything that makes your life better, Donald Trump is delivering on and fighting for. Record tax relief, zero illegal immigration, the largest reduction in murder since 1900, the lowest violent crime rates that have ever been recorded, no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, rebuilding the military, taking the fight to the drug cartels to keep fentanyl from killing our families and our children. Issue after issue, President Trump is fighting for our families, and what do they want to do? They want to hand over our nation to illegal aliens, criminals, jihadists, and communists.
Now, let's talk about the cognitive warrior's biggest mistake regarding the USS Lincoln. In attacking the mental toughness of our troops, they evoked something fundamental to American identity, and they simultaneously showed their own weak character and delusions about reality. Now, to me, the war in Iran is the ultimate just war. It is destroying the globalist petrodollar system that almost destroyed us under Barack Obama and Joe Biden, and clearing the way for a new Middle East built on advanced technologies and desalinization, not oil and gas for London's profit. You might disagree with me on that. The war has also stalled the dramatic drops in the inflation which Trump inherited from Joe Biden. But one thing no American would do, at least until now, is put out propaganda pieces portraying the men and women fighting this war as mentally unbalanced children complaining about food and laundry in a war zone, let alone the Democratic Party or mainstream media doing that. In effect, they say that those putting their lives on the line for us are overprivileged weenies. The Iranians, of course, immediately picked up on it, as anyone with a brain knew they would. A core American belief is that we are made to be strong and resilient in the most adverse conditions. The woke feminization of culture embraced by Joe Biden and Barack Obama says that belief is wrong. The weakness, victimhood, even criminality are virtuous. But that's beginning to produce popular revulsion against everything the Democrat Party touches, and it's the center of the USS Lincoln fake narrative. That's what makes the Lincoln narrative just a step too far for the Psy Warriors. It reveals both their own preferred mindset and the subservient culture they'd have us embrace. It's a mistake in playing with popular profiles equivalent to Hillary Clinton's use of the term deplorable to describe half of America. Once you see how the psychological warfare manuals work, you understand why staying on the internet or reading mainstream media produces such anxiety and passivity. They're designed to do just that. The turbulence, as they say, is the message. You will also see why the Trump administration has been careful to lay out the factual evidence about each step of the Psy war the population has experienced over the past decade. From Russiagate to Ukrainegate and impeachment, to the George Floyd riots and the rigged 2020 election in January 6th, to the COVID mandates and censorship, to the war on MAGA and Trump himself after he left office. The president and his people have moved aggressively against the apparatus that ran the Psy war. Darren Beattie, for example, the man who accurately defined the operation against Trump as a color revolution when he was a journalist, now runs the Institute of Peace and the State Department's public diplomacy branch. Those things and the National Endowment for Democracy is where the color revolution's apparatus sat. Now, we just have to use what we've learned to massively destabilize them between now and the midterms. In addition to creating an election too big to rig, we might also free those victims of their cyber war who have yet to see the light. That may seem audacious, but so did wiping out the City of London's financial control in 20 months. And unlike the weenie cyber guys, we Americans are actually strong and resilient. We need your help to help us grow. Please contribute as much as you can to make that happen. This has been your Monday Update. I'll see you again on Thursday.